the designer at Peekaboo Pattern Shop, and today I'm going to show you how to sew the Wanderlust duffel. The pattern comes in 4 sizes. This is a size small that I already have finished. This is a good size for like an adult weekend bag. This is the size I would use for my kids for a week-long trip. They're ages 2 to 9, and this would easily hold all their clothes plus their stuffed animals and other stuff they like to take along on trips. So this pattern has a shoulder strap, which is optional. That makes it easy to carry, and then your classic duffel straps that go all the way down and give you your carry handles. You've got a few different pockets to choose from. So this is the basic pocket right here. It's finished with bias tape along the top edge. You can put these on the inside or outside of the bag. This is a great place to stash a little snack or a book. And then on the inside of the bag, we've got some more pockets. So the pattern includes a zipper pocket, and you can choose your length of zipper. There's pattern pieces for a 4-inch, 6-inch, 7-inch, or 9-inch zipper. So you just want to choose a zipper that's not going to totally overwhelm your bag. For the extra small bag, you're probably not going to want a 9-inch zipper. So I like to put mine on the inside of the bag, just a couple inches below the top edge. It's a great place to keep your keys or your ID or anything you don't want to lose inside your bag. But you could also put this pocket on the outside of the bag if you want. You just need to keep in mind where you're placing it. So if you're putting it on the outside, this pocket gets sewn in before you put on the straps. So don't sew your pocket right here, or your strap's going to go right over the top of it. You'd want to put it in the middle between the 2 straps. Would be a great place to do that. So measure your pattern piece. Here's the pattern piece for the extra small. So this is the strap marking. So from here to here is the center line. So double that is how much space you have between your straps. So make sure if you're going to put your zipper pocket on the outside, it'll fit in that space. You could also put a zipper pocket on one of the end caps if you wanted to. Just make sure your zipper is smaller than the end cap. So I'd probably use like a 4-inch or 6-inch zipper if you want to do that. So the other pocket option you have, I included on the inside of my bag. So I'll turn that inside out to show you. So this is the pleated pocket. It has a box pleat at the bottom and then elastic on the top. So this pocket is going to hold a lot more. I put this on the inside of the bag, and I'll probably keep my kids like socks and undies in here so they're not rolling around all over the bag. Or if you're making like a dance bag, this would be a great place to put your shoes. You can see how much this holds. And while we're looking at the inside of the bag, I'll also show you this bias tape finish. So you can either just serge this seam on the inside of your bag, which is what I'll probably do most of the time just because it's quick. Or if you want, you can finish it with double fold bias tape. The bag I'm making today, I'm just going to serge it. And the reason these seams are all sewn together like this and the lining isn't separate is because otherwise your end cap pieces are going to pull away. When you have a pocket, since these are all sewn together like this, it can't pull away from the outside of the bag. But if this was a separate piece, it would just sort of collapse and flop over. So that's the way it's finished this way, just if you were wondering. So there's all our different options. We got the basic pocket, the pleated pocket, the zipper pocket. I should also mention this is view A, which has a round end cap. The other option, view B, has a rectangular end cap. So it has more of a flat bottom. I think view B is a little harder to sew, but if you like the flat bottom on the bag, it's shaped, more like this. It's a little easier to keep your stuff organized. That's view B. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we need to do is to cut out our pieces. Since this bag is lined, you're going to have an outer layer and an inside layer for every piece. So you'll have your end cap piece, which is either going to be round or the rounded rectangle for view B. So you're going to need to cut 2 of those in each fabric. So I'm using this blue fabric, and then I also have this white fabric. I've already added piping to this, but I did 2 in the white, 2 in the blue, and then 2 in my fusible fleece, which I'm using to give my bag a little more body since I'm using quilting cotton. If you want to use something heavier like canvas, then you can skip the fusible fleece and it'll still work out just fine. So you need 4 total in fabric of your end cap piece. This is the body piece. You have your markings for your side stripe placement and the strap placement. So you need 2 of these in your outer, 2 in your lining, and then if you're doing fusible fleece, 2 of those. Now if you're using a non-directional print, instead of cutting 2, you can just cut 1. So you'll fold your fabric twice before cutting it. So instead of just cutting on the fold, what you're gonna do is fold your fabric once, and then fold it once more. My fabric already has fusible fleece on it, so it's a little puffy. But it's folded twice. You'll fold at the marked line to remove the seam allowance, since you're not gonna have a seam on the bottom edge anymore. And you'll line up, there'll be a fold line marking here, 1 here, and then you'll just cut 1 big piece. And you can do that with your interfacing if you want, because it's not going to show and it's not directional, and for any non-directional prints. But for your main print, if you're using something that's directional, like this one, you need to cut 2 pieces so that it'll end up right side up. Okay, so here's my 2 pieces of my, this is actually my lining fabric, but I needed to cut them not on the fold. They need to have a seam at the bottom of the bag. So they'll get sewn together like this, and that way once we put the bag together, they'll be right side up on both sides, because I don't want my trucks to be upside down. So here's what it'll look like on both sides. So that's where there's a seam at the bottom of the bag, is so that your prints don't end up upside down. So now that, as I mentioned before, I'm not including pockets on this bag, but if you are, you need to find your pocket piece, you're either pleated or basic, and cut 1 on the fold for each pocket you want to have. So you can choose how many pockets you want to do, because you have 2 end caps on the outside of the bag and 2 on the inside. So you can do a total of up to 4 pockets. So cut 1 from your fabric for each pocket. If you're using kind of a bulkier fabric and you're worried about your machine sewing through that many layers, I recommend just doing 1 pocket on each end cap. They could be outside or inside, but that will cut down on the amount of layers that you need to sew through. So now that those are cut, I'll show you how to mark the strap placement. So you want to line up your piece, and what I like to do is just take my marking pencil and mark a little hash mark here and here. Do the same thing on the other side, and then use my ruler to go between the 2 points and mark across. So the main reason you really want to mark this side stripe placement is not only so you can make sure it's straight, but we're going to hide the seam for our strap underneath the side stripe. So we need to know where it's going to be ahead of time. And then you'll also mark where the straps are going to go. The straps do not go all the way up to the top of the bag. You can see there's about a 2-inch gap. So you can just fold it like this, or you can just measure it if you prefer, and just lay it right here and mark your strap placement. And we're going to center the straps right over this line. Also, I think I forgot to mention cutting out the side stripe. So here's the side stripe piece. You'll cut 2 of those on the fold. This is the little decorational stripe that goes across right here. So I already have mine cut out. So make sure if you're using a fun print or something that you have the design centered well. You are going to be pressing the edges under 1/2 inch. So keep that in mind if you're trying to center a picture or something on there of your fabric. The first portion of the pattern is all optional steps. So if you're a beginner, I'd recommend making a basic bag first. You can skip all the pockets and just get comfortable with sewing a bag. I'm actually not including pockets on the bag I'm sewing today because it's an extra small size for my 2-year-old and he's not going to care. But I did want to show you the pleated pocket real quickly just because that's something that can be a little more confusing. So you're going to fold your pocket piece in half with right sides together so these little notches at the bottom line up. So here's my pattern piece. Here's the notch. You want to line up those notches. And then you sew them together for just 1/2 inch, which is your seam allowance. And that's going to keep everything in place. We're making a box pleat. So you'll flip it over. You can see this is how much space it's adding to the pocket. And you'll just flatten this down, just like that, and baste it in place. So on the right side, it's going to look like this. And that's your pleated pocket. Now to finish the top edge of the pleated pocket and the basic pocket, you're just going to use extra wide double fold bias tape. And since these are just straight lines, really easy to sew, I like to just sandwich the bias tape over the pocket edge and sew it in place. If you're nervous about doing that all in one go, you can sew it on as a 2-step application. So open up your bias tape, sew along the first fold line, then wrap it around, and then sew. I really don't think you'll have trouble doing this all in one step since it is a straight edge and the extra wide bias tape is easier to sew on than a narrow bias tape. So once you have your pockets done, you'll add those to the end cap pieces. So you'll just decide if you want them to go on the outside or the inside, line up the notches, and baste them in place around the edge. So one thing to keep in mind, I like to add, if I'm only doing 2 pockets, one outside, one inside, don't put them on the same end cap piece because then you're just going to have a lot of extra bulk that you don't need. So this would be on one end cap, and then on the other end cap you could put another pocket. So once your pockets are done, the next step is our piping. So I already added it to this piece. So one thing that is super helpful is to use your zipper foot. It'll look like this. Move your needle all the way over to the left, and then you'll sew right along like this. I'll go show you how I sew it on the next piece. So at the ends, you overlap them, and it'll look like this once it's sewn. You'll just have a little cross there at the bottom. I like to overlap the piping ends down at the bottom rather than at the top of the bag so that it's not noticeable. And I've already basted these 2 pieces together. So this is my lining end cap piece and my outer end cap piece. I'm ready to sew the piping onto my end cap piece. In the tutorial, it's going to recommend sewing the piping to the outer layer first, and then you'll base the lining layer of your end cap piece on. But if you're not including any pockets on your lining piece and you want to just do this all in one step, quick and easy, that's what I'm going to do. So you'll start with the end of your piping off the edge, and then I'm just going to sew right along the inside edge of the cording portion of the piping. Now my piping has less than a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I'm not going to have this edge quite all the way lined up. So you'll have to measure and see where you need to attach your piping, because from the inside edge of the cording to the raw edge of your end cap, that needs to be 1/2 inch. Now since I'm doing view A with the round end caps, I find I don't really need to clip this seam allowance. But view B, you're going around some corners, it can be a little more difficult. What you can do is clip into the seam allowance of your piping, just like this, as you go around each corner, and then it'll stretch a lot easier to fit those curves. Now it's time to sew the straps. For the straps, you have 2 options. You can use webbing, or sometimes you'll see it called strapping. This is what I used. It was called Poly Pro strapping. Or you can make fabric straps. So if you're making the fabric straps, you need to use the length listed in the chart and then cut it to 4 times the width of the finished strap. So if you're making a 1 inch strap, So this is a 1-inch strap. You need a 4-inch piece of fabric. You're going to press the long edges in to meet the middle, fold, and press again. This makes it much easier to sew, and it's a sturdier strap since you have 4 layers of fabric. See, it's a pretty strong strap. Now, if you want to make it even stronger, you can cut a piece of interfacing to the same width as your finished strap. So add like a 1-inch strip of interfacing right here in between 2 of the pressed lines. Or you could also go ahead and put webbing inside a fabric covered strap, just like that. So you do the folding and then you top stitch on both long edges. I'm going to use this polypro strapping for mine. So when you cut your pieces, if it's a nylon based strap, they do have some cotton ones, but if it's nylon or polyester, you can seal the ends with a lighter and that'll keep it from unraveling. So I've done that to all my pieces. Now I'm ready to add the D-rings to my end cap pieces. So make sure you are adding these to the outer end caps. Well, actually at this point they should be basted together, but make sure you're adding it to the outside. So here's my inside, here's my outside. Make sure you put it on the right side. Now you do not have to add these if you're not adding the shoulder strap, but I like to anyway because it makes it easier to open the zipper. I'll show you. So when I'm zipping or unzipping a bag, I normally hold on right here. It just gives you a nice thing to hold on to, especially for kids. I just find it's easier. So even though I'm not putting a shoulder strap on this bag, I'm including D-rings. So you're going to cut a 4-inch piece, slide your D-ring on, but you don't want it to be equal like this. Instead, you want one side to be longer. So here's my end. I know it's hard to see in the black. That's right here, and then I'm going to fold it up over the edge and then lay this face down on the fabric, and I'm going to sew right here. You don't have to get super close to your D-ring. It's okay if it has a little wiggle room like this. You might find using your zipper foot helpful, but it's really not essential to get all the way up next to that edge, so don't worry about it. So we're just going to sew right here, and then we're going to do what's called barn door stitching. You're going to just stitch through it on the diagonal, and that just makes it really strong. Now, since I'm including these to make it easier to open the bag, it's nice to have them up near the top because it's really not going to help you if it's down here. But that does make it a little harder to sew the rest of your bag together later because it's just another layer. You have to make sure you have this out of the way. So if you've never done a bag before and you're worried this is going to be hard, move it down just a little bit further and then it'll be easier to sew. So I'm going to go sew this on and then we'll move on to doing our main strap. So I have these sewn. I actually decided to skip the D-rings since I'm not doing the shoulder strap anyway, and my D-rings were the wrong size. That's what you get when you're working from your stash. So I just left it as this little tab that my toddler will be able to hold on to help him with the zipper. So that's kind of another fun option you can do if you don't want a shoulder strap, but you still want a way to make the zipper easier to open for a little kid. So now we're ready to do the main strap. So you should already have your strap placement marked on here. Now we want to hide our seam underneath the side stripe. So we're going to find our seam and find the center of the strap and put the center where it will be hidden under one side stripe. And then on the opposite side, I'll put my seam. So make sure you don't twist the strap as you're doing this. So I'm just centering my strap right over my marked line. Okay, so I have those pinned. Now if you're doing fabric straps in a medium or large bag, instead of 2 seams, you're gonna have 4 seams. So the smaller size bags for the fabric strap, you'll have a seam here and a seam here. In the larger sizes, you are going to have seams here, 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 and here, but they will all be hidden, which is great. So you'll have the smaller section of strap will go in between these 2 points, and the longer section is what makes the handles. And that's for the medium and large bags. This is an extra small, so I don't need to worry about that. So now that I have my main points pinned, I'm going to continue up, stopping where my strap placement markings end. So I like to put a pin right where I'm supposed to stop. Now on this little size bag, it's really not hard to keep these straight while I'm top stitching them down. But on a larger bag, you might want to use some like wash away wonder tape or a washable glue stick to hold your straps down so they don't wiggle out of place when you're trying to sew them. I'm just going to keep pinning and see where I marked my strap placement ends right there. Pin there. Oops. One more to pin. Now once you have everything pinned, it's a great idea to fold your bag in half, make sure your straps are lining up, and make sure the handles are the same size. Otherwise, when you're carrying your bag, it's going to be super awkward. So if your handles are not the same size, that means you've messed up somewhere. Your strap isn't centered right. You might have not quite found the center point to pin here or something. So you need to adjust it a little bit so the handles will end up the same size. So now I'm just going to top stitch this. I'm going to go around, stopping at the end of each strap. The handles will stay free. And then do the same thing over here. And now at the end of each strap, this is going to be a major stress point because when you're carrying the bag, this is going to be pulling. So you're going to want to do that same barn door stitching like we did before with the X through the middle. You're going to want to do that on the end of each strap. Ready to sew the straps on. I'm going to sew right on the edge of each strap. I like to start and stop my sewing inside one of these marked side stripe sections because I know that's going to be hidden later. So I'm using a long straight stitch. I have this set to 3. Okay, so this is my pin marking where the end of the strap goes. So I'm going to sew up to that point and then sew across. And just like I talked about, we're going to add the barn door stitching to add some extra strength. So now I'm going to sew diagonally. Back across the strap. Up. Now I'm going back over. I've already sewn this once, so the second time is going to add some extra strength. Now I'm going to sew diagonal, back down. Now go down the other side of the strap and do the same thing on the other end. And then I'll repeat for this second strap over here. I have the straps all sewn down, so now it's time to add the side stripe, which as I mentioned earlier is going to cover up our seam right here in the webbing. So you should already have the placement lines marked on your piece. Make sure you have it nice and straight. And then just pin it down. And then we're just going to top stitch it on both long edges. Now this side stripe is a really fun place to add like a child's name or a school mascot, your high school name, whatever you want to add here. So you can decide whether you'd like to add that before or after you add the side stripe to the bag. If you add it before you sew the side stripe to the bag, you're not going to have as much stuff in the way, but you'll probably need to add some interfacing or something to your piece before you do any embroidery. If you wait until after it's already on the bag, you have enough layers here, you're probably not going to need any additional interfacing, so that's kind of nice. So just choose what works best for you, and then just top stitch this on. The side stripes are sewn on, so now it's time to add the zipper. You want to use a closed bottom zipper. See, this is closed at the end. Make sure you don't get a separating zipper or a jacket zipper, or sometimes labeled as that. So this is just a regular lighter weight zipper since this is such a small bag. For a bigger bag, you want to look for a zipper with bigger teeth, wider zipper tape. This is going to be a lot stronger and hold up a lot better. You can see these two in comparison, how tiny this one is. So look for a heavy duty zipper if you're making a larger bag. This is one I used on the size medium bag. So for really anything but the extra small bag, I would look for a heavy duty closed bottom zipper. So to sew the zipper on, make sure your handles are out of the way. You might choose to even pin them out of the way if you're worried about it. I'm going to lay the zipper face down on the body of the bag and sew together right inside the zipper teeth. Now if you're using a heavier weight fabric, you might not want to sew like right next to the teeth, or it might be hard to open. So maybe like 1/8 of an inch or even 1/4 inch away from the teeth if you're worried that your fabric's maybe going to get caught in your zipper. So I'm going to go sew this on and then we'll add the lining. I'm ready to sew on the zipper. I'm using my zipper foot and I'm putting my needle all the way over to the left. This will let me sew nice and close to the teeth. I'm using a bit longer stitch length here. I have mine set to 3.5 because we're going to be sewing over this, then adding the lining and sewing it again, and then top stitching. So it's going to get sewn 3 times. So I like to start with my zipper partially closed, and then we're going to move that zipper pull out of the way in just a second. So now that I've sewn a few inches, I'm going to stop with my needle still in the fabric, just barely, lift up my presser foot, and scoot the zipper pull out of the way. Now I can sew on the rest of the zipper. After you sew your zipper on, you want to zip it up and down, make sure it's working. And if you're not lining the bag, which isn't in the instructions, but if you're using a heavy canvas and don't want to line it, you don't have to. You can go ahead and just top stitch the zipper right now. I am adding a lining to this bag. So with right sides together, I'm just going to lay my lining right on top and sew it in place. Now at this point you can't really see the zipper, so you're just going to have to feel with your finger where it's at and sew on the inside of the zipper. I like to sew so I can see my lining and make sure my edges are lined up, but if you'd rather, you can flip it over to the other side and then you'll be able to see your stitching line from the last step and just sew on top of it. So you'll have to decide which you think is easier. The lining's sewn on, so now I'm just going to trim my seam allowance down a little bit. If you included a fusible interfacing, it's nice to trim that down just to reduce some bulk. Then you'll flip this over so the wrong sides are together and your zipper will be all that's extended. And again, make sure you can do your zipper up and down and nothing gets stuck. And we're going to top stitch through all our layers right along the zipper. So on the back, make sure your lining is pulled nice and snug. You don't want it to be loose like this or your zipper will get caught in it. So make sure you have the lining pulled nice and snug and then top stitch through all layers. I have my stitch length set to 3.5 and I actually switched back to my regular presser foot for this step. The zipper is sewn and top stitched to one side, so now we're ready to do the same thing on the other side. So you're just going to flip this up. Again, make sure your handle is out of the way. And sew to the other side of the zipper. So I normally bring it up and then flip it over like this so I can see what I'm doing. And then after you sew to the zipper, you're going to attach the lining. So fold the lining up and sew together, just like we did on the other side. And then you'll top stitch. The other side of the zipper is attached, so now it's time to top stitch it. I'm going to switch back to my regular presser foot. That's my preference for this step. Now this is going to be a little harder to do because your bag is sewn into a tube. So what I like to do is unzip the zipper, and then I can sew most of it with my bag open, and then I'll deal with the tricky part at the end. So just like before, I'm making sure my lining fabric is pulled nice and tight on the back side. Okay, I'm just about to the bottom of my zipper. You see it's getting a little more difficult. I'm going to sew as close as I can and then zip it up a bit. Okay, so the zipper pull is really starting to get in my way. So I'm going to zip up the bag just a couple of inches. Now I can finish sewing this last little bit. I already basted the edges of the body piece of the outer layer and the lining together. So now I'm ready to add the end caps. So I have these ready to go. The right side, well, the outside layer is going to be my white fabric. So you're going to line up your notches, and that's going to help you get it on evenly. So I'm going to turn my bag inside out. So the bottom seam in the bag will line up with the bottom notch on the end cap. Let's go ahead and pin that. Now if you have some clips, those would be a little easier than pins. My toddler ran off with all of mine, so I'm using pins. I'm going to pin the next notch. This is on the side of the bag. Now the top notch of the end cap is going to line up with your zipper. Okay, now we just got one more notch left. Now it's probably going to look like your pieces aren't going to fit. The bag is going to look, the body of the bag is going to look too small. So do not panic. This is especially true with view B. So if you cannot get it to just ease into place, on view A, I normally can just get it to ease. This is going to fit just fine. But if you're having trouble, what you can do is just snip into your seam allowance. Just every quarter or half inch, and that'll help the body piece. See how this can spread out now? That'll help it fit onto the end cap. So just keep easing those pieces together, pin all the way around, and then we're going to go sew. And now if you included piping, which I did, when you sew, you're going to want to sew right next to the edge of the piping. You want to sew right here. So that's something to pay attention to. Just get this pinned in place and then go sew it together and repeat on the other side. I'm sewing on the end caps now. I find this is easiest to do with the end caps against my presser foot and the bag is down against my sewing machine. So you are sewing through a lot of layers at this step. I'm just using a regular universal needle right now and it's working just fine. But if you used a thicker interfacing or maybe canvas, or you included a lot of pockets, you might want to switch to a heavy duty needle to make sure your needle doesn't break when you're sewing this step. Since I included piping, I can see my line right here where I basted the piping on. I'm going to try and sew right on top of that. So when you go around the top, make sure that your D-ring is out of the way if you included one. And as you're sewing over the zipper tape, just go nice and slowly. You may even need to turn it by hand. Make sure you don't break a needle. Both the end caps are sewn on now, so we are almost done. Before we take care of this seam, first you're going to want to turn the bag right side out and check to make sure everything looks good to go with your end cap seams. So turn it right side out, take a look, make sure you don't have any little tucks in your fabric or spots that you missed a layer. Now if you sewed with piping, you're going to want to make sure you sewed nice and close to the piping. If you have any spots where it kind of gaps a little bit, you can see where it doesn't quite, it's not quite snug against the cording. You can go back over that spot and sew a little closer. You might decide it doesn't bother you, but if it does, now's the time to fix it. So once you're happy with those, turn your bag inside out again. And now it's time to finish the seams. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial, you can do this either with a serger, which is what I'm going to do, or with double fold bias tape. So if you're going to use bias tape, the pattern has instructions on what length to cut it to. You'll sew it into a circle, and then we're going to use the two-step application. So you'll sew one long edge, and then wrap it around the seam, and then sew the other. Now if your fabric is really bulky, this can be kind of hard to sew. It's going to take some patience, and you'll want to use a heavy-duty needle. Now before you do bias tape or a serger, you're going to want to trim these seams down to get rid of as much bulk as possible. So for starters, definitely cut off those notches. You don't need those anymore. Down here you have your extra piping that you don't need. Trim that off. And then going all the way around, I'm going to do what's called grading the seam allowance, which is trimming it to different widths. So like this blue layer, I'm maybe going to choose to trim it down as close as I can to my seam, to like 1/8 inch. And I'll just continue doing that all the way around. And then maybe this layer, my end cap, which is the fabric and my interfacing, I'll try and trim that down to like 1/4 inch. And then I can leave the last layer, which is my outer layer of fabric, at 1/2 inch. And that just will really cut down the bulk. This is going to make it easier for your serger to get through, or your sewing machine if you're doing the bias tape. So I'm going to keep trimming this seam allowance down and then go finish it up with the serger. I just serged the seams on the end caps, so those are all done. And then the last thing I did is top stitch the seam allowance by the top end of the zipper to the end cap, just right here. And that just gives this seam some extra stability since it's a pressure point. So just top stitch nice and slowly right here, went back and forth a few times. And this adorable little bag is ready to go. This is going to be the perfect size for my 2-year-old to bring stuff to grandma's house when he goes for the day, to just bring a change of clothes and his little blankie and maybe a little snack or something. Or it'd be great for carrying around his toys. So the last step is if you're doing a shoulder strap, which I didn't, but I'll show you how to do that. So I'm done with that bag. But if you are doing a shoulder strap, you're going to need a strap adjuster piece. So it's going to look like this. You're going to take your strap, go around the middle of this piece. So it'll look like that. And then sew down the end. Now I don't have any more swivel hooks to show you with this strap, so I'm going to show you with one that's already finished. So after you've gone through the middle, you'll go through one swivel hook, and then back up through the strap adjuster. So here's the one that I was showing you with. We imagine I'd gone through my swivel hook. Now I go back up through the strap adjuster, back down the other side. So this is what makes your adjustable strap on this end. And then you'll go through the swivel hook on the other side. And that gives you this nice strap that you can change the length depending on who's carrying the bag. And that's it. You are all done sewing your very first Wanderlust duffel bag from Peekaboo Pattern Shop. I hope you enjoyed it.